up to this stage. It is very commendable for this Parliament to be talking about this at this time, because a number of countries, including Ghana, pass persons with disability laws. In the case of Ghana, this law was passed in 2006. And as soon as the law was passed, various academics and people with disability associations immediately pointed out some omissions in this act. And one of them was the omission in the act of the equality or non-discriminatory clause. And from what has been provided for in this model law, everything has been taken into consideration. Many laws that have been passed by African countries were taken on board, and new ideas have come up. I believe that with these consultations that were also done on the regional basis and for the inputs of many people, including experts and parliamentarians, this law has addressed quite a number of omissions in the previous acts. These laws were passed based on conventions, protocols, and treaties. At that time, the problem of terminology has always been, and still is one. What should we use to determine persons with disability? So at one stage, it was physically challenged. At other stage, it was disabled persons. But now, with this model law, we have come to some consensus or some understanding, because we involved in the process the people who suffer various disabilities. Apart from the equity or parity issue of non-discrimination, as provided for in many of our constitutions, it is also affected. And I'm very happy to see that in this model law, this issue has also been addressed. What I will further say is, for us all to go back and impress upon our parliaments to amend or enact, as some of them as not yet passed the bill or the acts, to look at this model law very, very, very seriously. Indeed, the recommendation from the chairperson is for us to pass it on so that the AU heads of states will adopt it. Let's do it as fast as we can, because it is going to help those who still are to amend and those who are to make the laws, make them effectively. The issue of disability is one that at any time, even those who are strong today can become disabled. It is important, therefore, for society to give them rights and enforceable ones. And so in this proposed bill, what you can see is the responsibility of the state to disabled persons and how these are enforced. Unfortunately, in the model law, there are sanctions. There are sanctions for violations. And I believe that if we get every country to adopt and model this law according to what we have proposed, then it means people can be held responsible, people can be held liable for infringing upon the law when it is passed. Mr. President, I believe that we all owe it a duty as people who are making laws to ensure that this law gets the support of our state. And people with a disability and rights of the people of Africa should be pursued. On this note, I commend the chairperson and the committees that have worked on this. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Honorable Mantelman. Now I give the floor to Honorable Maria Augusta Carrera from Angola.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this opportunity that I'm given so that I can make some comments on this law that we are discussing. I would like to start by commending the Gender Committee on the efforts to prepare such an important law, because it is a legal instrument that protects the fundamental rights of the human being. Today, the world is fighting for the inclusion, for adopting politics so that we are all equal before the law, before distinctions of any kind. It should be a role of states to look after health and social affairs for those who have disabilities, and to promote their integration into community life. The principle of equality is considered one of the basic principles that has as a basis to promote equal treatment of individuals, and this principle that is also known is the result of an attempt to correct historical mistakes, to give equal treatment, something that sometimes cannot be provided to somebody with disability. The Angolan state has adhered to this convention on people with disability. The implementation of this convention is part of the implementation of public policies taking into account commitments that have been made.
Micro.
Nesse tempo todo sem. Je recommence? Ah. Ok, merci. Portanto, dizia...
I was saying that the Angolan state has approved the implementation of this convention that is part of the execution of public policies, taking into account commitments that have been made domestically, internally, with a view to meeting conditions for its effective implementation and implementation of the civil, political, economical, and cultural rights of people with disabilities. And all these issues are established in our laws and in the international legal instruments. There is an institution called ADRA in Angola that has been working with the state to implement this convention. According to data from the General Census of 2014, 600,000 people in Angola are living with disability, with 2.5% of the population, out of which 300,000 are men or male, and 290,000 are female, which is 44%. The effects of more than 4 decades of armed conflict have contributed to this high number of people with disabilities. So the adoption of this legal instrument will provide for the protection of rights of people with disabilities as defined in Article 4. Thank you very much.
And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Evelise Presta from Angola.
Obrigado, Sr. Presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. All that I want to address has already been covered. I would like to commend the Gender Committee that has worked on this important instrument. Thank you very much.
And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Maxa Bupe Ngonga from Zambia.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to be able to add some words on this important model law on disabilities. Mr. President, following the adoption of the Continental Plan of Action for the African Decade of Persons with Disability between 2010 and 2019, and also following the adoption of the Protocol for the African Charter on the Human and People's Rights, on the rights of persons with disabilities, the decision by the Pan-African Parliament to come up with or to develop the model law on disability is a very welcome move and extremely very important, and therefore, Mr. President and your members of Parliament must be commended, for this action. I also commend, Mr. President, the chairperson on the committee on gender and also the other committees that worked together with them, health and the committee on rules, in order to come up with this model law must also be commended. Mr. President, as you may be aware, this model law will not only remove all forms of discrimination and obstacles, but also, it helps to give a chance or impetus to those African countries, people living with disability. And this act was adopted in 2010, and we have also a council on disability which is in charge in order to enforce. But unfortunately, Mr. President, the law can be in place, but the enforceability of the law may be something that we may not be able to do adequately as may be required. So being part of this group during the consultation, Mr. President, I was able to be amazed that there are also other forms of disabilities which may not be very much enlightened, especially in this part of the world, the Central African, the southern part of Africa, especially the people with small bodies. Please bear with me if that is not the correct word that is used in the nomenclature, but these are people you could basically see that, yes, they also suffer quite a lot of consequences and a lot of discrimination. They have their human rights, they have things that they may require in order to live perfect life as the able-bodied bodies. So a law like this coming into place, Mr. President, will be able to address many forms of discrimination that may be happening in areas where such people are occurring. One of the things that came to light, Mr. President, is the inadequate or unavailability of data and statistics in most nations, including probably my country, Zambia, that we may not necessarily even have the total statistics as to how many disability, persons with disability that we have, and also disaggregated to different categories of disability. So a law like this puts into place or empowers the state or requests the states to ensure that they put in place adequate measures so that you are able to get data, statistics that then can be able to be used in decision making. How do you make decisions if you don't even know how many people that you have maybe blind, or those that are albinos, or maybe that because even within our African context, it's very, very possible that even now in most rural places you find that people hide their children that are born with disabilities. So therefore the states must be encouraged to ensure that they have statistics that are important. Mr. President, let me also join those who are urging the members of Parliament, because we have a duty to ensure that we impress upon our executive wings of government to bring the protocols to Parliament, so that these where parliaments ratify are able to be ratified, so that this protocol and these laws can come into effect. Only 15 African countries are required to sign and ratify, and as we speak, Mr. President, only 5 have done that. It's a shame for the African continent, I think we must take this very, very seriously and ensure that our colleagues, even if we are all potentially disabled, but our colleagues that live with disabilities must not live. Just 1 minute, Mr. President.
Thank you, dear colleague.
Must not live.
30 seconds. 30
Yes,
seconds.
must not live on our hext like they are beggars and we are doing them favors. They are all entitled to living a life and to having the rights as enshrined in all our charters. I thank you, Mr.
Thank
President.
you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Star Mate from Zimbabwe. Stars Mate.
Thank you, Mr. President, for the time that you have given to me to share my views on this report. I would like to thank the chairperson who took with her committee time to give a good report that we had. Thank you very much. Mr. President, the model disability law is a fundamental provision with our body politic. This category of people has been marginalized in several countries, Mr. President. I want to reiterate the fact that disability is not inability, and as such, people with a disability need the same attention granted to the able-bodied people. Mr. President, women and children find themselves on the receiving end when we talk of disability. In a family with a disabled child, it is usually the disabled parents or grandparents. We have already seen them in the streets, and that is happening in all countries. In this regard, there is need to empower women and children to be able to understand the dynamics of disability, as well as help them with the basic requirements to take care of their disabled ones. Governments should prioritize people living in disability and allocate requisite budgetary needs to this sector. It is therefore incumbent upon us, honorable members, when the ministers of finance presents national budgets, that we lobby for increased budgets towards disability. Disabled people are prone to different ailments that need to be attended to. It is my hope that one day all African states will grant free health care to the disabled people. Mr. President, Section 120.1D of the Constitution of the Republic of Zimbabwe provides for 2 members of the Senate representing people with disabilities. This shows, honorable members, that already the proposed law is in sync with our...
1 minute, Madam. 1 minute, microphone, Madam.
As a former teacher, education remains at heart for me. In this regard, I want to draw your attention to the situation in Zimbabwe, where we have schools for the disabled, for example, schools for the deaf, schools for the blind, and a vocational training center for the disabled, and sign languages. In the same vein, as a former teacher, I would suggest the harmonization of a provision where disability studies are introduced in the educational curriculum at the educational entry level, so as to nip discrimination and stigma against the disabled in the world. Generally, Mr. President, I would like to suggest to this Parliament that if all parliaments should recommend the 60th member to this PAP, and that member should be a disabled person. Having said this, Mr. President, I want to support the popularization and implementation of this very important model law. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Dr. Zalikatu Diallo from Guinea.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to also commend the chairperson of the committee for the wonderful work they have done right through the process of drafting this model law. Now, being the rapporteur of the Committee on Health and Social Affairs of the Pan-African Parliament, I did participate in the process because the Health Committee was represented in the Consultative Committee, and we all worked together. This is a model law, if enforced, could add value to national laws and also could urge countries which have not addressed the problems of people and groups with vulnerabilities to adopt this legislation and lift all the obstacles and discrimination against this important portion of our population. As far as my country, Guinea, is concerned, we already have a law in place. We have ratified the International Convention on People with Disability, and we have passed a law on 15th of May 2018 at our Parliament. And this was done through a very good partnership between the United Nations High Commissioner's Office for Human Rights and the Ministry of Social Affairs. In Guinea, we have at least 160,000 people who live with some form of disability or the other. This is the reason why the enforcement of this law involved the adoption of a national convention for the empowerment of people living with disability, as well as the inclusion of people with disability in all governmental institutions. Now, in our Parliament, we have a sight-impaired person who works with us. We have another human rights organization where people with disabilities are represented, including the Association of Albinos of Guinea, which I sponsor. And I really hope that the 15 ratifications required for the entry into force of this model law of the protocol will be undertaken as early as possible, so that we can contribute to the full development of these vulnerable people and realize all the sustainable development goals by 2030. And I thank you.
I want to give the floor to Honorable Evangelina Filemena Oyo Ebule from Equatorial Guinea.
Gracias una vez más, señor presidente.
I thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the chairperson who presented this theme and also commend all those who intervened on this theme. This is a very important matter, which is a huge challenge for all of us. As the previous speaker said, in Equatorial Guinea, the government does have a specific budget to assist albinos as well as people living with other disabilities. In the lower chamber of our Parliament, we have a senator who also lives with a disability. We have director generals and other civil servants who are albinos and who are part of government service, and we do offer medical care to them as well as a good pension so that they can live in dignity and they can live properly. This is very important indeed. I do remember that in the Parliament we have used this project to work in our different countries, and we have worked with the support of our government. And whatever has been said here so far means that we must continue our work to make sure that these people can access a better quality of life and don't consider their disability as something which is negative and which does not allow them to live a full life. I thank you.
Senora, now let me give the floor to Honorable Anan Salem from Libya. I give the floor to Honorable Pupure Tugarepi from Zimbabwe.
Mr. President, most of the things that I wanted to say have been said, but safe to say, I want to thank the chairperson of this committee for a job well done, but I also want to say or reiterate that as was said by some of my colleagues, it's important that we demonstrate as PAP that we embrace this model law by ensuring that members with disability are part of this august house. I also want to encourage the drafters also to try and widen the definition of people with disability. In most cases, you find in countries that there are specific disabilities that are considered and looked after either by government or non-governmental organization. But I think we have many more disabilities that have not been considered, and people suffer with those without recognition and support from government and some development partners. So I also encourage that when we talk about disabilities, without including people with disability, even if we bring in experts, I don't think they will exhaust the issues or challenges that are faced by people with disabilities. So it is very important as we deal with this model law that people with disabilities are at the forefront so that they can share with us as we encourage this law to be adopted by various countries. I think members of parliament, I would want also to encourage you that to go in your own parliaments and ensure that your governments ratify this model law. It's critical, it's very good for our people, and the people with disabilities are as important as we are to the national development of our people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, and now I want to give the floor to Honorable Yapambu Jack from Benin.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to request you to allow me to thank the chairperson, because I was part of that committee, for the brilliant presentation of her report. Mr. President, you know how difficult it is to live with a disability, and it is a factor which restricts the full development of the man or the woman who is living with this disability. So, Mr. President, if along with this disability, appropriate measures are not discrimination against such people, it would be very harmful for us, especially for those of us who are able-bodied. Because during our existence, we might always end up in a situation of disability, because you can have a road accident or any other kind of accident, and you might end up with just one leg or 1 foot or whatever, or even injured in your eyes, and you end up with a disability. So this is the reason why our Parliament should all that it can so that we are protected from any form of discrimination which is affecting our brothers and sisters who are living with disabilities. Now, with respect to Benin, we have 2 ministries who work together, which work together, namely the Ministry for Family Affairs and second, the Ministry for Social Affairs. It is true that my country has not yet ratified the protocol, but since I am a member of this committee, I will do my level best to make sure that this actually becomes a reality by 2020. I will contact the two ministers, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and all the other relevant ministers to influence them, as I've just said. Yes?
Bon, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, to conclude, I would like to request all the parliamentarians present here that once they go back to their homes, to become ambassadors for the promotion of this instrument, to make sure that all our countries can speak the same language. So that after we get the 15 ratifications, the protocol actually becomes a reality, it enters into force. But as you know, in our countries, laws are enforced case by case. But I suggest that parliamentarians present here should go back and make sure that they can lobby their governments to enforce, to ratify this protocol. Thank you. Thank you, dear colleague. It's very difficult to be a judge where everybody has rights, and you've come here to talk, and it's very unpleasant to interrupt a person who's speaking, so please bear with me. I'll call on Honorable Marie Mediatrice from Rwanda. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to join the previous speakers to commend our chairperson. I'm the vice chairperson of the committee, so I'd like to commend her for her good presentation. First of all, I'd like to commend the countries which have hosted all the meetings of this consultation, and also thank my colleagues, our MP colleagues who hosted us in their respective countries, and we'd like to also commend them for having organized the consultation meetings. Mr. President, this process is very long, and while we wait for this model law to be concluded and enacted, I would like to call on my colleagues to continue advocacy in their respective countries in order to put in place legal instruments for the protection of people with disability. In my country, Rwanda, the Constitution has established a National Council for People with Disability. In 2007, Rwanda enacted a law on the social protection of people with disability and a law for the protection of former war combatants living with disability. We also have a law on elections which provides for the election of members of parliament with disability. I'd like to also call on colleagues to allocate a certain amount of money in the budget for people with disability. We should also remove all obstacles to employment of people with disability and put in place measures in order, like a quota system in all public institutions for people with disability. Continue to support initiatives taken by associations or cooperatives established by people with disability by guaranteeing the required financial and material resources to them. We also need to put in place a permanent framework for awareness raising to change the mentality of the public vis-a-vis people living with disability by broadcasting radio and television programs meant to educate the public on the rights of people with disability. And finally, put in place a system, an inspection system Yes, my last point. Put in place a system for the inspection of buildings and other equipment used in public to make sure that they are suitable for the needs of people with disability. I thank you, Mr. President. I now call on Honorable Mazabuka Shipo from Malawi.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor to contribute to this important model law. I am extremely happy to see this topic today is on an often forgotten and neglected segment of society, which are our brothers, sisters with various disabilities. It is extremely important to discuss these issues today because all of us, so often, these issues are left on the shelf and are often forgotten as compared to issues of finance, agriculture, or technology. Mr. President, I wish to particularly draw this House attention to Article 31, which talks of the protection from abuse and harmful traditional practices. It is sad to note that after so many years, persons with disabilities continues to face pity, shame, stigma, exclusion, and discrimination. We still find stories these days of parents who lock their children inside the house, sometimes even chain them to the floor so that they should not be seen by the public. This is such a tragedy and a violation of human life and rights, and indeed we need to adopt a model of law to address this issue. Mr. President, I wish also to draw the attention of the House to Article 32 that talks about the state taking specific measures to ensure the protection and safety of persons with disability. Over the past few years, the continent has seen a rise in cases of attacks on persons with albinism. Unfortunately, these issues are not particular to any one country. They transcend borders and regions and need collective efforts to end them. In Malawi, we have the Disability Act 2012 that looks across discrimination against people living with disabilities. Therefore, I'm calling upon all countries to join hands and adopt this law so that we can address this specific area. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Regina Esparon from Seychelles. Regina?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, the issue of disability on the African continent should be taken more seriously. It is not enough to have treaties and protocols that we sign, but in practice, we are breaching what our own country or head of state have themselves signed. As we welcome the protocol on the African Charter of Human and People's Rights on the rights of persons with disability in Africa, and now the Africa Model Law on Disability, we should also be bearing in mind of our situation back home, how to domesticate it and harmonize it with our own national law back home, as pointed out by the presenter in her presentation. As legislators, we have to put more emphasis on how to enact laws that would protect those that are more vulnerable by protecting their rights and that of their families, while we draw up policies and while we approve budgets, to make sure that in all aspects, people living with disability are included and not excluded. Mr. President, case in point, in some African countries, people living with albinism are classified as people with disability, yet they are being stigmatized and discriminated and killed. What are we doing as legislators to protect them? Be it cultural or ethnic issue or xenophobic, it is our duty to step in and protect people living with disability. Back home, people living with albinism are normal people integrated in society as everybody, so we don't have the issue as regards to them. Because it is also a cross-cutting issue because each ministry address the issue at ministerial level. Mr. President, we talk a lot about gender-responsive budgeting. I feel there is a need for a framework at each national parliament for a combination, a combined disability and gender-responsive budget. The Seychelles delegation, we welcome the model law and support the cause. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. I don't know if it is a mistake. Honorable Pemi, you need the floor again? Thank you. Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Fatou Jaora from Gambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I will also like to add my voice to the previous speaker and to commend our chairperson of the Committee on Gender for tabling this very important model law. Mr. President, considering the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, the disabilities in our societies, disabled persons in our society should have been treated equally, Mr. President. They should have right to facilities and devices to enable them to live in dignity. Disabilities should have right, and their right need to be realized, including the albinism. My country, the Gambia, is yet to ratify, but my government is committed in championing disability because we promoted the sound language in our national TV, and we have a minister responsible for social protection. Mr. President, going by the charter, the preamble reads, concerns that persons with disability continue to experience human rights violations, systematic discrimination, social exclusion, and prejudice within political, social, and economic sphere. Another concern raised are the multiple forms of discrimination at high level of poverty and the great risks of violence, exploitation, neglect, and abuse that women and girls with disabilities face. So I think as parliamentarians, as elected representatives, we all have a quota to play to see this thing is ratified in our various countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Honorable Yeremia Shiwana from Malawi. Yeremia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Most of the things which I wanted to say have been said, but suffice I want to intervene on 2 or 3 issues. Apart from the general disability, I would like to urge this parliament to see to it that maybe some few consideration or serious consideration should go to mental disability. While other disabilities could easily be repairable, but mental disability, especially attributed to drugs and drug addict, is becoming a challenge and a common phenomenon in the whole of Southern Africa. Apart from that, I also wanted to say 1 or 2 things on budgeting. Yes, it is a cross-cutting issue in terms of budgeting for disability, but there is also a challenge for direct investment and financing of disabilities. I urge this parliament to consider setting up a fund for disability so that they can have direct access in their nations. Generally, very old people are by nature disabled. Again, they need special intervention in terms of health and other programs which need their attention. We may not look at them as in a different way of disability. In Malawi, we have also attempted to handle disability issues in 2 forms. In terms of children, we have tried to introduce school feeding programs, but with limited budgets the country is facing, it is very difficult to finance each and every disability. Apart from that, in agriculture, we have also attempted to include disabilities and challenges for elderly in terms of farm input subsidy programs. Yet they might be successful, but because they don't work directly into the programs of production, it is very difficult to ascertain whether they are successful or not. Furthermore, recipients of cash transfers, be it disabled or elderly people, it is very difficult to ascertain how they can reach to the youth who are disabled, because normally the youth are not considered in the mainstream of programming. I support that we should really encourage that this cross-cutting program should be nurtured and ratified. I submit.
Thank you very much. The debate is closed. Chers collègues,
Distinguished colleagues, before I give the floor to the chairperson of the committee to respond, I'd like to make two important announcements. The first is with regard the conference on women's rights on Monday. I invite all honorable members without distinction to kindly attend this conference and to participate in the debates. The conference will take place on Monday and Tuesday. My second announcement is as follows. Following requests from some honorable members, I would like to recall that communication fees are inalienable. In the past, they would be paid on a pro rata basis, and yet those fees were meant to be paid during sessions, and the balance was never paid back. So now what I'm saying is that let me not hear that anyone received half of their communication costs. You're entitled to the full amount. It is available, and you can go and collect your full dues. That was the announcement that I felt I should make. I do not want someone to come and see me and tell me that they lost 2 days of their communication fees. That said, allow me to give the floor to the chairperson of the committee to make her responses. I believe that in general, we are all unanimous that this model law on disability is extremely important. We are all potential disabled persons. If it's not today, it could be tomorrow. Therefore, we need to work to improve the living conditions of persons with disabilities. That is my first comment. Secondly, if there are any contributions on the model law, they could be integrated so that we enrich this draft, because we intend to present it at the assembly to be held in January 2020. Chairperson, you have the floor.
I thank you, Chair, Mr. President. I thank the input by all colleagues to enrich our draft law. The contributions were in the sense of recognizing the importance of the law. Therefore, I'm not going to reply each question. I will give a general reply, and I highlight three aspects which to me were presented in a way of question. First, the definition of the concept itself, which is in our draft model law, and they say that it's that definition of concept. It was reached by consensus. All the process of consultation involved civil society, the people with the deficiency, the alliance was with us, with the technical and the financial partner of this project. We also have the contribution of lecturer, people living with disabilities, and MPs and the civil society at large. For this, presently, we define deficiency, including those who physical, mental, intellectual, and sensorial deficiency, which the intervention would could hinder their participation. Article 4, we spoke of, and on page 10 of the principles of protection, which was reflected by colleagues, mentioned by colleagues, and I would like to have your collaboration in interpretation. We are still in page 10 with problems of translation of concept of people with deficiency in the Portuguese. Since we are going to adopt the document, we need standardization in translation of the documents. This should be taken into consideration. The change. Page 10 replace the terms. This has got to do with the English, with Portuguese persons with disabilities, not people having disabilities. To say that all colleagues recognize the importance of this instrument as an legal instrument, but they need to harmonize the legal instruments in our national parliaments. The colleagues also mentioned the need of engage ourselves to ensure the signature and the ratification of the protocol as soon as possible. This, right now we have only 5 countries who signed the protocol: Africa, South Africa, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic. All of us, including my own country, they haven't signed and not ratified. The countries which I mentioned, which have already signed, they have tried to ratify it. We have to ensure that the ratification should be done by a minimum of 15 countries to allow its entry into force. With regard to the issue of assistance of families, this is an issue which was discussed largely with the civil society organizations. Initially, the draft project, the draft law, they have this element, but the last consultation this issue was introduced in the document. I would like also to ask for your apologies. The contributions which we received, the document in Portuguese, I don't know the situation in other documents. It is mentioned some lines or some items without the contents, which is exactly the contribution for improvement of the document. So in the Portuguese text, the contribution has been registered in the document, so in the electronic version of the document. Mr. President, allow me also to make some corrections which are really important. Page 10, as I was saying, Article 4, page 36. I don't know which version is she mentioning. Article 30 is repeated twice, so it will be 30 and 31. I guess she's following the Portuguese version. Page 41, the capital, chapter 4 says gender, elderly, and deficiency. This should be corrected. Gender, and should be read gender, elderly, children, and youth, because the objective speaks about children and youth. Page 45. Article 46 should be now page 46. Article 42 should be Article 44. There's a problem with the enumerating of the articles. Page 46. Article 46 should be 46. So basically, these are the corrections which I had the opportunity to note. I don't know whether other colleagues they had their own correction. These corrections should be mentioned in the report for approval of this draft law with the corrections which I'm proposing, so that the document could be finalized with all these corrections, repeats the Madam, to say that the issue of statistics was amply discussed, and it's also a problem in our countries. We have problems to have a database which would allow us to make a distinction of the type of disability by gender, by etc. So this was also part of this consultation at the level of people caring with people with with handicap. We encourage colleagues at the time of domestication of the law. This should be taken into consideration, and countries should adopt the mechanisms to protect those of families which care for people with disabilities, which depend at 100% by third parties. My country, Cape Verde, we approved last year the National Plan of Care, which is an answer to the colleagues who were asking for the training of these people. This plan includes this aspect, that they establish a new professional category. So we have a new category of professionals. We have those who specifically are trained to take care of people with disabilities, profound disabilities, which take care of our families, the elderly, and the children. The issue of cutting crossing issues. It was also discussed at the level of consultation, and the colleagues mentioned that it is important that we should make a positive discrimination on the budget for people who live with the disabilities. With regard to universalization of health care, this issue was discussed. The issue of quota for employment, it's important that the country should take this into consideration. The World Bank and the WHO determine that there is 15% of the world population live with deficiency. It's on that basis that each country should do its homework first to collect data, obtain viable statistics. I think I spoke too much, and following the contribution of our colleagues, I would like to end up saying that people with the disability don't need they need our love, they need of our passion, our social awareness with regard to the issue of handicap. They should be part of our policies of development so that we could have a prosperous Africa tomorrow. Thank you very much.
L'ensemble du projet, pas d'observation, pas d'objection, adopté.
No objection, adopted. Honorable colleagues, I made some announcements and I've been asked to repeat them. I say that in August, we decided that by a show of solidarity, Honorable Conte and Honorable Temple, our two late departed colleagues, we would organize a contribution to the best of our ability and for the love that we had for our two departed colleagues. We did not designate or appoint any focal points, but for Honorable Temple, the chairperson and treasurer of the Southern African Caucus, and For Honorable Conte, it would be for the president of and treasurer of the West African Caucus who would be responsible for collecting contributions. The second announcement was with regard to the Women's Conference. I humbly request you to attend this meeting that will begin on Monday morning. My third announcement, which is not the least, is that your communication allowance is available. Honorable Clerk, do you have further announcements to make to honorable members? Announcements. This afternoon from 2:30 to 4:30, the Women's Caucus will be held in room 3. In addition, from 2:30 to 6 p.m., we'll have the Youth Caucus in tomorrow from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. a training workshop on the formulation of model laws, as well the conduct of public hearings will be organized for members of permanent committees and members of the various bureaux. Thank you. We have come to the end of our proceedings. We will adjourn and we will meet on Wednesday, 16th October.